In July of 1859, Abraham Lincoln, legal counsel for the Illinois Central Railroad Company, hosted an inspection tour of over 705 miles of the company's railroad properties. Joining Lincoln were a group of state and corporate officials and their families. This tour brought the group to Dunleith, present-day East Dubuque, Illinois, and Dubuque, Iowa. And this is the story surrounding their journey. A 165 years ago, in 1859, July 15th, 1859, Abraham Lincoln and his wife and Willie and Tad and the whole entourage of railroad officials and state officials came through Mendota. Actually, they traveled the entire Illinois Central system in a tax case, and it was an extremely warm July. The day that I'm recording this is also July 15th, and it's very warm. It's going to be 91 degrees, but I'm in this Illinois Central car and it's warm. So I can't imagine how they traveled on a train. There was one locomotive and one passenger car. It was a special car. It did have a room, sleeping room, and a dining area, and it was one of the fancier ones. They believe it was George McClellan's passenger car, private car, the one which he let Stephen A. Douglas borrow on the Douglas debates, Lincoln-Douglas debates the year before. And there was some controversy which kind of leads into this case, because the State Auditor was not too happy with the special treatment that the Vice President of the Illinois Central, George McClellan, was giving Stephen A. Douglas, as opposed to Abraham Lincoln, who had to ride in a regular passenger car throughout the debates. But that's a different story. The story I'm going to tackle is the 9-day trip, the State Auditor Assessment Tour. It was a 9-day trip to assess and value all of the property of the Illinois Central, 705.5 miles from Cairo to Dunleith, East Dubuque, and then from Chicago down to Centralia and actually they started in Springfield. So on the Western Railroad, they came from Springfield on probably a very humid morning and a very warm, muggy morning, just like this morning. And they traveled from Springfield to Decatur. At Decatur, they got on the Illinois Central line. And then they headed north. And every station stop, they had to get out, assess the property, the buildings, the track, the yards, the switches, the towers, anything to do with the Illinois Central Railroad that was built, which it was completed entirely in 1856, but 1853 it opened through here from Bloomington to Mendota and onward to Dixon and Freeport and so on. But anyway, that 9-day trip started at Springfield, and I am guessing that the halfway point is basically Mendota. If you leave Springfield and you gotta cover, you can only do this trip during daylight hours because they had to view all the property. So if you start in Springfield and you come to the IC line in Decatur and you start there and you work your way north, and they probably could have stayed overnight, maybe in Mendota, but possibly Amboy or Dixon. So we don't know that, but we know that they did have a 9-day trip. And this 9-day trip, it was in the middle of July. They left July 14th, Springfield, and they headed north. And I just, I think about how brutally uncomfortable it must have been in those non-air conditioning days where ceiling fans weren't even invented until the 1880s. But on the trains, the passenger trains, they would have a big barrel of ice water in, I guess, the back of the car or whatever, since they only had one car. And then they would hand out ice cold water to the passengers. And that was basically all they had. But at every stop, not every stop, but many of the stops, there were like little railroad parks or shaded areas, trees that were along the tracks. Like especially here in Mendota, we had a large railroad park here that extended about 2 blocks, and the passengers could get out and go under the trees. But anyway, I would say that when they made their stop in Mendota, they got off the train and probably ate first, because Mendota had the passenger house, which was a designated eating house on the railroad. And there weren't many of those on the Illinois Central Railroad. There were a few, and Mendota was the main one. Mendota connected with Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy at that time. The forerunner of the CB&Q was the Chicago and Aurora. But anyway, this was a main hub, and there were a lot of trains coming and going through here. And in that time, the Illinois Central had the eating house here, they had the park, they had a big freight house, they had interlocking tower, they had a water tower. As a matter of fact, right where I'm at, just a little bit behind me, near the 4978 steam locomotive, was the Illinois Central Water Tower. It was in line with Jefferson Street. And then you had the big passenger house, eating house, and I'm assuming that after they were done eating, of course they got off the train, Mary Todd and the 2 kids probably wanted the platform, were happy to get off the train. Everybody was happy to get off the train because it was hot, very hot. So that would have been at least late midday or around supper time. I'm guessing maybe around late afternoon, because if they left Mendota and headed north when it got dark, they probably ended up around Dixon. And that's a guess, you know. We have no records of that. The old guest book from the Nachusa house in Dixon is a mystery as to where it's at, but the Nachusa house is still there in Dixon as a old folks retirement home. Anyway, so after they got off the train, ate, assessed the property, maybe Mary Todd and the kids were in the railroad park, maybe some of the officials were in the railroad park, because the trees were a form of air conditioning. When it's 95 degrees or 100 degrees, it was supposed to be recorded, according to what is written, it was 98 degrees to 108. So today here in Mendota, on July 15th, it is going to be at 92, and there is a heat advisory. And I'm feeling a lot of heat in this car right now. And I have the doors shut because of the noise, but anyway, I wanted to emphasize that this 9-day trip happened. It's recorded. They covered the entire Illinois Central system. They left from Decatur, went all the way to East Dubuque, and there was no bridge to cross over to the other side into Iowa until 1868. And that would be about 9 years later. So they had to take a ferry across the way. Then they came back after, I think they stayed there overnight, and then they headed on a different railroad, I think the Chicago and Galena, over to Chicago and stayed overnight there. And then they came down the line to Centralia, and once again making their way down the line, assessing all the property, all the trackage for tax purposes. A tax case that the Illinois Central was saying, hey, our property is only worth $5 million, basically $5 million. And the State Auditor, Jesse Du Bois, was saying it was worth $20 million. So the IC refused to pay taxes on that inflated price. And so they just didn't pay it, and they missed one of the payments that was due, I think, October 30th. It came and went, and the IC was basically sued in the People versus the Illinois Central, and that case was eventually solved in Mount Vernon and the Illinois State Supreme Court. Jesse K. Du Bois and Abraham Lincoln's friendship began in the early days of their political careers in the Illinois House of Representatives from 1834 to 1842. Both men were active power brokers in the emerging State Republican Party Central Committee in the 1850s. Lincoln first befriended Du Bois when they served their freshman year together in the Illinois State Legislature in 1834. Lincoln convinced his old Whig friend to join the Illinois State Republican Party in 1856 and helped him get elected State Auditor in that year. Du Bois and his family moved to Springfield in 1856, just a few doors down from the Lincolns on 8th Street. The Lincolns and the Du Bois would spend countless hours at each other's homes and would vacation together. From the moment Du Bois took over as State Auditor, of Public Accounts on January 12, 1857, he had been publicly scrutinizing the taxable assessment value of the Illinois Central Railroad Company, Illinois' largest corporation, under the provisions of their state charter. On October 9, 1857, in anticipation of their first semi-annual tax payment coming due on October 30th, the Illinois Central suspended all payments of debt and was assigned to a 3-member trusteeship for financial restructuring. On October 22nd, Auditor Du Bois levied his tax assessment for 1857 against the railroad with a payment of $86,449.02 due in 8 days. October 30th came and passed without a tax payment to the state by the railroad. The People versus the Illinois Central Railroad. This was a case that was 3 years in the making, in which Abraham Lincoln was caught between his primary source of income in the 1850s, the Illinois Central Railroad, and a close political ally and warm personal friend, Illinois State Auditor Jesse K. Du Bois. Freshman State Auditor Du Bois had been threatening to file a lawsuit against the Illinois Central for back taxes due even before the Illinois Central paid the first installment on their semi-annual tax bill as defined by the state charter, with payments to start in October of 1857. The state charter under which the Illinois Central operated and was to be taxed was open to interpretation. The state auditor had made it known early on that he interpreted it one way, and the railroad made it known they interpreted it another. The state auditor assessed the value of the Illinois Central Railroad using a different assessment method than the one used to value all other railroads operating in the state. Du Bois placed the assessed taxable value of the Illinois Central at $19,711,559.59. The Illinois Central's 1857 replacement for Roswell B. Mason, Engineer-in-Chief and Company Vice President, Captain George McClellan, believed the railroad was being assessed 4 times the rate of any other railroad operating in the state, and believed the valuation to be more accurately reflected at $4,942,000. McClellan and the Railroad Board of Directors also knew that the Illinois Central was financially in trouble, and with the looming depression and the panic of 1857 on the horizon, could not afford to pay the state taxes on a property assessment they believed to be inflated and unfair. In May of 1857, Illinois Central President William H. Osborne, in council with Illinois Central Resident Director of the Law Department Ebenezer Lane, a former Justice of the Supreme Court of Ohio, decided to induce Lincoln to use his personal friendship with the state auditor Du Bois to help buy the railroad some time with its tax troubles. The Illinois Central had a problem, however. The railroad still had not paid Lincoln for his work from 1853 to 1856 on the case Illinois Central Railroad versus McLean County, Illinois. After nearly a year of trying to collect the fees Lincoln felt were owed to him by the railroad, he filed suit in Abraham Lincoln versus Illinois Central Railroad in January 1857. Mr. Lane had also informed Mr. Osborne that State Auditor Du Bois had offered to put Lincoln on the payroll as lead counsel for the state in the impending court battle that would lead to People versus Illinois Central Railroad. This was an attractive proposition to Lincoln, as he was in need of revenue as he fought his own battle with the railroad for past due fees. Osborne knew the railroad needed to act quickly to win over the most able lawyer and politician in all of Illinois. Osborne and the railroad worked out a compromise with Lincoln. If Lincoln would reject Du Bois' offer and defend the railroad would not contest or defend Abraham Lincoln versus Illinois Central Railroad and would pay Lincoln his full asking price at the end of the case in a couple of months. Lincoln found the appeal of receiving a much-needed $4,800 desirable and agreed to the Illinois Central's offer. On December 21st, 1857, Lincoln found himself writing his old friend Du Bois on behalf of the Illinois Central Railroad, not as a railroad lawyer to the State Auditor, but rather as a lawyer providing his personal opinion to a friend. Lincoln wrote to Du Bois, quote, J.M. Douglas of the IC Railroad Company is here and will carry this letter. He says they have a large sum, near $90,000, which they will pay into the Treasury now, if they have an assurance that they shall not be sued before January 1859, otherwise not. I really wish you would consent to this. Douglas says they cannot pay more, and I believe him. I do not write this as a lawyer seeking an advantage for a client, but only as a friend, urging you to do what I think I would do if I were in your situation, unquote. John M. Douglas was an old Galena, Illinois mining lawyer who was now the solicitor for the Illinois Central and one of Lincoln's closest allies and political supporters within the Illinois Central Railroad corporate structure. Du Bois opted to go with the advice of his friend Lincoln and agreed to the proposed terms and received the $86,000 from the Illinois Central into the state treasury. This was a wise move given the stock market had crashed 3 months earlier and the panic of 1857 had begun. The railroad industry and railroad stocks were one of the hardest hit industries during and after the panic started in September of 1857, as passenger and freight travel, along with revenues, started to rapidly drop across the country. There's more to this. If you are interested in reading about this, I am reading from, it is called, for you, Mr. Lincoln for the Defense, Writing the Illinois Central, Dunleith and Dubuque Bound, by John T. Pregler. And I found this on the lensofhistory.com, and yes, the lensofhistory.com, July 2018. And I would definitely recommend you to read the rest of the story, but it ends well with Lincoln winning the case, and the Illinois Central was happy about that. Hello, Lee.
Hello there. How's you doing there?
I'm doing fine. I heard that people were telling me, the town folk were telling me that you actually met Abe Lincoln here in Mendota at the passenger house.
Yes, I did, and Mrs. Lincoln was with him, and the two boys also one time.
Okay.
And you know, you probably don't know the story, but she was really into purple, and she always had a lot of her dresses done in purple. And so I gave her a bouquet of my purple flowers that we have all along here with the trees. I had the purple flowers. I gave her a bouquet to take on the train too.
Oh, that was nice of you.
Yes, I thought it was too. And she was so happy to get the purple flowers.
Yeah, and I remember also people telling me when you were talking to them that they were kind of resting underneath the shade trees.
Yes, they would rest because we had all these trees all along here that they hired me to take care of the grounds, of course. And then him and his wife, they would eat at the passenger house too. A lot of people didn't realize they would eat at the passenger house because they had places to stay and they had a restaurant below to eat.
Ah, okay, yes. I did hear that that was one of the designated passenger houses on the line because it was such an important connection with the Burlington.
Oh, yes,
Yeah.
with that Burlington Railroad.
Yeah.
I was with the Illinois Central, though. Not
Yeah. When did the Illinois Central hire you as a full-time gardener?
1853.
1853. Wow, that was a long time ago.
And boy, there was a lot of hot days. That's why the Lincolns would sit under the tree because it was so hot. And I've got the straw hat and the long sleeve, and I've got it rolled up because it's just so hot out here working the grounds.
Yeah, I heard it was about 102 degrees that day.
I bet it was. It was just darn hot.
My gosh.
Sweating like crazy.
I mean, what did they do to stay cool on the train, you think?
Well, they would have water with some ice, because they didn't have anything, way to keep anything cool, of course.
Wow.
They just had water with ice, and they would just drink ice water to keep a little cool.
So I heard that a lot of state officials and railroad officials were on this train, and that brought them here to Mendota. What were they exactly doing, did they tell you?
Yeah, they were inspecting to make sure, because they were being taxed on the property. That's why they were inspecting to make sure that they weren't being overcharged on the tax of the property. That's why they were here.
Ah, okay. And I heard that they had to travel the entire Illinois Central system. I mean, 705 miles, and I think it took them 9 days?
At least 9 days, but there again, because to make sure they weren't being overtaxed. And they wanted to make sure, which is a darn thing to do, because we're all overtaxed on everything.
Yes, we are. And so did you get to speak with Lincoln at all?
Not that much, because he was too busy with the inspecting. I did get to see him once or twice. And then I was here when they got on the train to leave, too. I was here to wish them well. That's when I gave Mrs. Lincoln the bouquet of purple flowers.
Wow. And what was she wearing that day?
Well, naturally, she had on a dress that had the purple because that was her favorite color. People didn't realize that, but if they saw her, they would know. She always had purple dresses on.
Ah, okay. Wow. So, you had basically a 2-block area of trees, and what else did you have besides the trees in that area?
The trees, and then we had these flowers, had a lot of flowers. These purple flowers went all the way down because they lived for a long time, and they look good, and there's not much maintenance on these. They just grow. You don't have to do much work on them.
Okay.
It's bad enough trimming trees and breaking up leaves, and there's some weeds, of course, too. So.
Yeah. Wow, okay. Well, I really appreciate your time. It's very fascinating meeting the first Illinois Central Railroad full-time gardener. Full-time they hired you.
Yes, full-time.
I mean, they must have had A large area for you to take care of.
Oh yes, it was a block-long area of a lot of trees and flowers.
Okay, well, you can say you were one of the few that have met Mr. Lincoln here in Mendota, and there's a lot of history.
A lot of history on that. Yes, there was a lot of history on that. I'm so glad I got to meet him.
Okay, is there anything else you would like to add to the story about...
Well, I did take the train. I went down and took the train to Ottawa when he was having his debate with that Douglas.
Oh, okay.
Of course, you know how that all came out. He ended up losing the election for senator, and that Douglas, no good guy, beat him out. But
Yeah.
that's okay, because then he went on to become president of our country.
Yes, he did, yes.
Good thing that he didn't get to be senator.
Right, yeah.
Yes, that's good.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, I was down there for the debate. I had to go listen to the debate. It's so interesting to hear him and Douglas talk.
Yeah, I heard that was August 21st, 1858.
Yes.
So a year later, almost a year later, just 11 months later, he was here again on the inspection tour.
Yeah, that's right.
Wow.
Again, so.
Wow, so we can say Lincoln stopped here in Mendota.
Oh yes, right over there, because he got on.
Uh-huh.
He walked into the passenger house, and he was right at that spot, not too far over there. So
Wow.
he stood at one time.
Yeah, and what's the building behind you there?
That's the freight house.
And that was built, I heard, in 1853 when the railroad first started.
Yes, it was. That was put up for them, so they got a nice brick building over there.
Yeah,
And it's still standing yet, too. It's so good to have it still there. So.
it is. Well, I thank you for your time and all of the work and effort you do in keeping the weeds pulled and the gardening, and you're still doing that, I hear.
I'm still doing it. I'm still getting paid, and I got to keep working to pay bills.
Yeah.
That's good. Well, thank you for talking.
Okay, thank you very much. Have a nice day.
You too.
All right,
Be
bye.
good.
All right, bye.
Bye.
So come to the Mendota Railroad Museum and see a lot of stuff, a lot of history stuff. Relics from the past of Mendota. A model of the old depot that was built in 1888 and torn down in 1942. And all of the old yards, freight yards, are depicted. The old water tower, the CB&Q freight house, and even the old interlocking tower, which I remember as a kid. Got to throw a switch in that. Oh. The Illinois Central Freight House is still there in Mendota. And you got the old Milwaukee Depot over there. Unfortunately, we got a train in front of it. Not the best way to display that right now. But anyway, it's a big room, and over there in the distance you have the largest collection of CB&Q railroad locomotives built by Dave Beck. And this, you will never see anything like this. If you're a CB&Q fan, you have to make it here. Yes. Some great stuff. Even a model of 4978 here. And you can see the real 4978 outside there. I don't know if I can zoom in there, but it's out there. Let's see, there it is. Okay. Waiting for you.